Yeah, so there's basically, two main types of annealers. You have it's called an induction annealer, and then there's open flame, right? Those are the two different kinds. On either kind, they do have some sort of mechanical feeding mechanism. Like on mine, there's a dial, a time setting, where you can control how long it spins around and then spits it out. And these induction annealers, you actually set the heat you want, and then it'll just spit it out.
All right, what is up, everybody? Jim to my right. Jim, it's always great having you. A special guest, repeat guest. We've got Scott Parks, the Scott Parks across from us.
Old Just Hunting Scott.
Old Just Hunting Scott Parks. He managed to drop one right before the podcast. Again, kind of gave me a good old-fashioned reset there. And Tucker Schmidt.
Yep.
First timer here.
No.
Been here before.
Wait.
He's been on once before, but he didn't work here.
You were also
when he was
absent.
on before.
Oh.
Right.
That.
Got it. Okay, yeah.
That.
Tucker, thanks for reminding. Yeah.
Yep.
So he was on. It was just myself, Ruben, and Tucker, and he also didn't work here yet.
That's why I don't remember.
Right.
But I remember I wrote the copy for it because I remember going because I thought I'm an insane person. I'm writing the copy for the podcast. I'm like, I don't remember any of this.
Right.
I believe you were hunting bear at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet. I got one.
Nice. Even better.
Hey.
Topic of today's conversation, annealing. Now, the first time I heard this word, I think we were actually doing a reloading podcast. I think Tom Leatherberry was on it.
I think it was our first reloading podcast,
and
Reloading 101 or something like that.
And Tom said, he's like, annealing and this, that, the other. And I was like, I don't even know what that was. I think we talked about it a little bit. And then probably the second time, we were doing the 6.5 BC Wildcat with Ryan. And I think it might have been you, Scott. We were talking about, anyway, so a person was like, I hope you guys don't have to anneal.
Right.
And I was like, again, I don't really know what it is, but yeah, me too. So,
let's be honest, Mark. It's part of reloading, so you could even peel that onion back a layer further. We've done reloading now. I hope you don't have to reload that. I hope you can just buy that.
Yeah. It comes in boxes of 20. It's ready to go. I digress here or tangent, but not necessarily reloading, Jim. The accurizing of muzzleloaders. Ryan M's been helping me out with that a little bit as of late. Just, weighing your charges and sizing bullets, and that is attractive to me because it's very applicable for me, Scott, for just hunting.
How is reloading not applicable for just hunting?
Because I can anything.
You're onto something.
Thank you.
No.
It's not just me.
No.
Okay.
Anything I get off the shelf is good enough. Is more than good enough. It will exceed probably the performance that I would personally get out of reloading.
So and trying to make an argument for my comment there. It's good enough because it's.
Oh my God, Mark! You really backed yourself into that one.
I kind of stepped into a trap there. Where I'm going with that is I'm going to get half MOA accuracy out of the, I'll say sub MOA accuracy out of the commercial loads that I get, and I think that's really, really good.
Commercial ammo has come a long way in the past decade or so, for sure.
I think it's even less than that, honestly.
Yeah.
5-6 years. A couple of big companies have really stepped it up in good, consistent, accurate ammo.
So thank you,
good
gentlemen.
on you, Mark.
So yes, but with the muzzleloading though, I think there's some tweaks that you can do to really wring out some high level rifle type performance. That doesn't take a whole lot of extra work. That's another key component for me. Not a whole lot of extra work.
Right. So speaking of a lot of work, let's talk about annealing.
This
comes from a comment that we received on one of the YouTube videos.
Yes.
From a gentleman by the name of, at least on YouTube, your name is Zach. Zach H. We'll say Zach H for now. Mm-hmm. And we don't all that. What is that? Herpa. What's the name?
HEPA.
HEPA.
Is that right?
HEPA?
Yeah.
That's health stuff.
HIPAA health.
HIPAA.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
So we'll just say Zach H.
The HEPA stuff is health as well, Jim. But
so Zach H. he just suggested, hey, how about you guys do a podcast on reloading? And on annealing, pardon me. It was more specifically, how about you do a podcast on annealing? So here we are. We're doing that. Also like to point out, too, some of the other comments we get, they're not always necessarily about episode suggestions. This one was just from Matt W. you guys are a lot of fun. I'd empty some beers with y'all. And any comments like that are always welcome. Maybe someday we'll get to do that. Hopefully we can empty them into our mouths, and it'll be a good time.
That's one of the nicest things anybody's ever said to us, Jim.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into annealing. Let's first off, we gotta say, what is annealing? Who wants to start with that one?
Yeah, Jim. You're reading my notes.
I didn't have to read your notes. That's like interview 101.
You're cheating.
All right.
So basically, annealing is you're heating case neck, case mouth area to basically soften the brass, because over time, as you reload, it will work harden the brass, eventually cracking neck, maybe making numbers worse. I think typically you heat it 750 degrees Celsius, somewhere around there is like the ideal temp. And basically, you're trying to increase longevity of your brass. So that is annealing in a nutshell.
It's something that people who reload the same brass multiple times will be considering doing. Like if you're going to shoot, hey, like here's factory ammo, I got it, boom, I shot it, I picked up the brass, I'm going to reload this brass like once fired brass. Annealing probably isn't on your radar yet, right?
Correct. Depends on who you ask. That's the thing. So there's a lot of different theories. Which one's right? Honestly, I really don't know. But I think me and Scott differ on opinions on when and how often to do it. I think a lot of that depends on which device you're actually annealing with. Some are a lot easier than others. But yeah, I think that depends on who you ask.
Boy, I hope we get into all that. So, all right. But sorry, Mark. But I was just going to say, so from what it sounds like, though, the process of reloading, since we are manipulating the case back into a specific shape in order to be compliant with our specs of our bore and our chamber and all that stuff, that's going to eventually make the case less malleable and soft because we're dealing with brass, right?
Exactly.
So that's what you call work hardening. That can eventually, let's say you work harden something and you don't notice. I don't know if it ever is to the point where if it's not very noticeable or if it is pretty obvious when it happens. But from what if you get a crack in that mouth of the case or in the neck or something like that, that's no bueno.
Correct.
Like not good things occur from that.
And if that happened, that would be due to that work hardening that we're talking about?
Generally, unless it's like a way over-pressured case or something like that. But
or just a defect in the case.
Yeah, that's also a thing. But more than likely, it would be a work-hardened piece of brass that you have then pushed beyond the limits. Okay. It will start with like a hairline crack, and you might not catch that. But then when you shoot it, you will notice it'll be a good split in there. And usually it doesn't cause like catastrophic problems. But It anytime you have a crack in a piece of brass is not not desired. So
I wonder. So probably if you're listening to this, you're like a little bit more advanced. You've done some reloading, but I do wonder if it'd be beneficial for maybe if a person's like kind of getting into it to back up a little bit and talk about what's happening to the case when you fire it, and then kind of like where you're trying to get it back to.
Sure.
Would that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. So when you start with a brand new piece of brass, whether it's factory loaded ammo that you're going to reload or just bare brass that you buy, the factory anneals the case neck and shoulder before they ship it out because they have work hardened it to get the bottleneck head shape to it, right? The neck and the shoulder.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
So like straight wall cases, you really don't really need to worry about annealing. There's nothing moving all that much, in my opinion. Anyway, somebody might differ with that on like some bigger straight wall cases or something. I don't know about you, but I'm not reloading like a 416 20 different times. I'm not even shoot it 20 times, so
no,
it's not an issue for me.
Right. Scott likes the little baby cartridges.
Yes.
Little guys.
So the case then forms to your chamber every time you fire it, right? Which can also play a role with how work hardened your case gets, depending on how loose the chamber is. So a factory gun's probably going to be worse than a custom gun, ideally. Oh, your custom gun's going to be nicer.
Factory gun, in theory, there's more slop in there for your case to expand into when
you're talking about a company making thousands and thousands of barrels, chamber and barrels versus a custom that might be making tops 1,000 a year.
Slop is probably the wrong word to use.
No,
slop's the right word.
It's accurate. Yeah,
it's accurate.
I don't want people thinking that like, oh yeah, it's a sloppy gun from the factory. Not
so then you take that fired brass and you go to resize it, and now you bring it back down to the size it was. Now, mind you, it's not moving that much, but any any bit that you move metal around, if you think about a thin piece of metal, that if you bend it all the way to the point to where you stress it and work hardened it, and you keep on bending it back and forth, eventually it cracks.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's the
like
same thing is happening.
paper clip or
It's the same
like
exact
that,
thing. So, and on top of that, depending on what brand die you use, you may be overworking the brass by sizing the neck down too much, more than you need to. And this is where you start to run into issues, right? Now, if you're pushing your shoulder back too far, you can run into other issues. But specifically to the case neck, because that's typically where you see cracks, is in the neck.
Mm-hmm.
That's about the only place I've personally have ever experienced them.
Yep, you either usually get some kind of, like he was saying, the neck splits, or another failure common is like a case head separation, but that's something different entirely, right? But like he was saying, usually, precision reloaders will try to bump the shoulders 2-3 thousandths tops, sometimes 1. And really what that does is just leave you a little more space in the chamber, so when you close the bolt, you're not having like a sticky bolt or something like that as you're trying to, push the round in from a magazine, something like that.
Okay.
I've talked about that before, but I was just hunting one time with a buddy of mine, Scott, and shot at a game animal. Luckily, it was first round hit, dropped it right in the pocket, ended up tipping over. But it did split in the neck there, and just like a tiny crack, and it wouldn't eject. Couldn't get it to eject.
Yeah.
I think we ended up pushing it.
Yep, and that's kind of what I was telling you, Jimmy. Like, if you do get that crack, it's usually not something devastating. It will change your speed, maybe your accuracy a little bit, but generally the round will fire. You may have a problem kind of pulling it out, but it shouldn't be anything too crazy.
Okay.
Yeah, I think you can speculate on this. I think what happens in that situation is you get gases that end up getting pushed back around the case, so now the case can't grab the chamber wall, so your bolt is doing all the work, and so you get that sticky bolt lift because all the pressure got sent to it, so the case just expanded front and back instead of grabbing the case wall.
Yeah, and
Gotcha.
what he's kind of talking about, as you were talking maybe for newer listeners, is when you actually fire, that brass expands, matches that chamber, and actually grabs into there and grips it and assists the bolt in, basically counteracting that bullet firing out, and then it actually has some spring back, and then you can pull the brass out easily with a bolt, basically.
Right. It kind of expands and then contracts enough that you can eject the case.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when you get that split case, the split neck, because the bullet's still in the chamber when that happens, you get a bunch of blowback that ends up going into the chamber around the brass and doesn't let the brass do that, grip that chamber wall. And I don't have scientific data to back that up, but it's the only thing that makes sense to me. So
well, no, you can see it on the brass.
You can see it.
Because it's not sealed, right? You can see the big black marks on the side of that crack. So I think you're right.
I hadn't thought of the brass actually being part of
the equation.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah, it gives it a little more like dwell time or whatever, like for a gas-operated system, something like that. It helps assist that like opposite force as you're shooting, right?
That's one of those things you got to wonder when they develop bottleneck cartridges and all this other stuff, or I guess maybe that's just a cartridge thing in general that happens. But when they developed them, was that just oh wow, that's pretty handy that occurs, or was it no, we're going to make ammunition work this way from the start?
Well, this also kind of leads to the point of like people don't want to shoot steel case ammo in their guns because you're not getting any of that feature while you're shooting. So that's why some people say it's harder on your firearm when you're shooting steel case cheap type of ammo. So that's I don't know when they were maybe practicing on different types of materials, but I'm guessing that's why they settled on brass for the long term.
Oh, okay,
right.
Yeah.
Because brass, when you apply, when we're talking, I guess, annealing here, you're applying, heat to the case. Right. Brass will react differently to that heat than like other metals.
Correct.
So,
yeah. Well, and brass is also then that's what what Tucker was talking about too. It just in the chamber, brass is more malleable. So the steel case isn't going to do that that. Wow.
Yeah, definitely not to the extent. I'm sure it's
probably some.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, just not as much because it's not as malleable.
Right.
Interesting stuff. Mark, what question did you ask to get us here?
I don't know.
We were at because you want to know what happens to
I tripled up and then but yeah, so what you guys kind of were maybe had differing opinions of like when you should start annealing?
And do both of you anneal, like, because you guys do this as something you do when you reload. Do both of you anneal for your precision stuff? Or okay, because Tucker, I know you do like some also action shooting stuff with pistols and ARs and things like that, but you also shoot precision. So this is something you do for your precision.
Yes.
Ammo.
So when it comes to like my opinion, right? I don't want to do it on that stuff like 223. It's just cheap brass. And when it comes down to it, it's not very expensive. I lose it, no big deal. But this other stuff, $1 plus a piece, like you want to reload that as many times as you can, upwards of 20 times sometimes. Ooh. So, I mean, I don't know what the right answer is. I've done it a couple different ways. I guess it's probably good to talk about the different machines and stuff, but I guess we can get into that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but so I do it every time now, just to kind of keep everything consistent all the time. I use what's called annealies. It's a fairly inexpensive form of a machine. Basically, it's got a hopper in it, and it can auto feed. And as it comes out of there in a batch, I'll kind of take that batch over to let it cool down, obviously. I'll load it up again and let that keep going, and I'll be resizing and kind of just keep that going till 1,000 pieces is done, and then that's just kind of how I do it. I used to do it every third time, and honestly, I didn't notice a whole lot of difference. But I only got so many reloads out of my last batch, and I'm going to see this time if that kind of helps that equation a little bit. So we'll kind of see what happens.
How about you, Scott?
So I generally don't anneal until I get a split neck.
Does the annealing fix the split?
No.
Not on that piece.
No. Just lets me know that I need to anneal the rest of them.
That's his indicator that it's time.
So we're opposite ends of this thing, right? So.
Yeah. So you're going to you're going to have one sacrificial lamb.
Yeah, well...
hey, sorry, guys, your brother's dead. I'm going to make sure all you guys don't die, too.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And so far, I've never had it affect me at a match. I always find the split necks as I'm resizing them the next time.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't something that
caused the problem.
When you go to resize it, change the shape, and then you see the split pop.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Is there or have you found any, I guess obviously that's how you're doing it, so you're not seeing like a negative, I guess, overall effect other than losing that one case. But are you work hardening it to a point that you might get less reloads out of it because you've just really, I guess...
I don't think so. I mean, I have a lot of brass right now that I've been running since 2010 that's been a couple different calibers, and I would venture to guess it's got close to 40 reloads on it.
Oh, wow.
Dang, man.
That's a lot of
and
reloads.
It's
Scott
been
likes
6.
to ride the lightning.
It's been 6. I'm kind of a stickler about picking up my brass.
Yeah, no, same. I am too. It's expensive.
So it started out at 6.547, was shot for 4 seasons. And that was, you remember how often I was shooting back then.
Mm-hmm. A lot.
So, and then I tried my hand at 647. Don't get me started on that cartridge. But the brass got a lot of firings on it at 647, just trying to load development in 5 different barrels and 6,000 bullets that never came of anything.
Never came to fruition.
And then I created the 6 Vortex.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So I had to...
We should do a cartridge talk on that,
We should sometime. Remind us of that, Scott.
Sure.
And listeners.
So then I had to neck it back up to 6.5 because then I had to create a false shoulder for the 6 Vortex to blow it out because it gets blown out just like a 6BR does when you're fire forming it to a dasher.
Yep, I'm just going to nod.
Right.
So now I will tell you, whenever I do something drastic like that, I will anneal. So if I take brass that's been fired a bunch already and neck it down to something else, I'll anneal it. And then if I change it from there, since I know the brass already has a lot of firings, I'm going to, something drastic like that, I'm going to anneal.
Yeah.
Because that's a major change to the shape of the case.
Correct.
Okay.
I was going to say, when that 647 never shot because it's been 3 different calibers.
No, I tried new brass.
I got you.
I could just never...
Dude, you're like one of those restaurants that fries their stuff in the same oil for like decades. Like, oh yeah, we got the same oil we had when we first opened back in 1937.
It's the secret to the recipe.
It must be. It must be. But what annealing does is, we've mentioned this work hardening process a number of times, but it's you need to get the brass back to a certain level of kind of malleability.
Right.
If that's
it basically
if that's a word.
restructures it brings the molecular structure back to a certain softness.
In essence, though, like there's no point at which, let's say in theory, you anneal every single time that you reload, and you anneal to like just you anneal really well. We can maybe get into what that looks like, proper, all that stuff. But you do the process to a science. In theory, that brass can be work hardened, go back to its proper state, be work hardened, go back to its proper. It can keep doing that over and over and over and over and over and over and over.
In theory,
eventually you're going to lose a primer pocket or a case head or something else.
Okay,
right?
got it.
Like
yeah.
the case neck and mouth will be fine in the shoulder, but other things will then fail. So.
It's kind of like metallurgy at this point that we're talking about, but like metal can be sort of brought in and out of these states of being work hardened and being brought back to like malleable.
Correct.
Yes.
It can kind of continue to do that for a long period of time.
Yeah, and annealing's not something that's just a reloading thing. Like annealing was around long before anybody thought about reloading ammunition.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's a metal working tool per se.
An interesting
or
one,
process.
So
I will say something that I wanted to throw in the beginning. So hopefully this doesn't get missed. My opinion on annealing is that it really should be left to advanced reloaders.
Okay.
I think the majority, and this is just my opinion, but in my experience, a good portion of people that will try to anneal will actually do their brass or their shooting more harm than good if they just would have left the brass alone. I've seen studies, and I've personally experienced this with not annealing very often. I'm pretty sure it was the AMU, the Army Marksmanship Unit, I think. But I read a study a while back on it was on 308 brass, and it was specifically annealing or not annealing. And they did 10 firings, and the only thing they saw was a slight drop in velocity.
Okay.
But accuracy and precision stayed the same. So no annealing, 10 firings. And I think you could probably attribute the slight drop in velocity to probably slightly less neck tension because the neck is not getting sized.
It's springing back.
You're getting more spring back.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And that's kind of been my experience, I mean, as long as the neck's holding the bullet comfortably, when I'm reloading, I feel everything feels fine. The gun still shoots just fine. Doesn't matter how many.
So if you're talking about, I guess having a negative effect from annealing, like what potentially could happen
Sure.
there?
So one, all brass is not created equal.
Very true.
So you have to know your brass.
Okay.
Right? Like I can tell you, another thing we didn't cover here is guys, on annealing, we're only trying to anneal the shoulder and the neck. Right?
Not the whole kit and caboodle.
You definitely do not want to anneal the whole kit and caboodle. You'll run into some major malfunctions or catastrophes.
It's like your buddy that got him stuck in the oven, right?
Yes.
Same kind of thing.
Well,
Exactly.
I mean, there's parts of the case that you do want to have that kind of, I guess, elasticity, I guess, lack of a better term,
Yep.
and parts that you don't.
Yes.
And then I guess also you look at the case design itself. That's designed like it's thicker towards the rear and
Correct.
thinner at the neck.
It is weird. A lot of people look at a case like, it's just one uniform, just chunk of brass that they just, kind of put some pockets in for stuff. It's like, well, no, it's a gradient scale.
You got to think the base of that case is taking anywhere from like 60 to 80,000 psi
Depending
of
on
pressure.
loading.
Well, that's the thing. 80,000 will be on the very, very high end.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they want that base of that case to be a little bit thicker and to be able to handle a lot of that force.
Yeah.
So the top end and the opposite is a lot thinner, right? Because we're going to be stretching, moving, holding bullets. We want it to be a little more elastic.
Yeah,
so.
it has to expand, it has to contract.
Correct.
It's doing a lot of things there.
So there's certain brands of brass out there where the case wall is thicker or the same thickness as the neck and shoulder. And then there's certain other brands of brass out there where the case wall is actually thinner than the neck. And so that brass becomes complicated to anneal because you have to get the neck so hot that it ends up getting down the thin wall of the body, because the body's thin, so it's going to heat up quicker, right? So even though you only have the heat on the shoulder,
it's going to dissipate its way or whatever.
Exactly.
Really fast.
So you have to be real careful there.
Okay.
You know, I would say, in my experience, if you're looking to play around with annealing, I would only do it with the more expensive type brass out there without dropping names.
You can drop a name.
Okay. Well, I don't.
He's going to say Lapua.
Yeah.
Lapua,
That's
Alpha.
one of them. Alpha.
Yeah, there's a few boutique, right?
Right.
Peterson. I mean, there's a couple that are known to be a higher quality. I mean, it's no secret, right? So
Yeah.
those are the
and
ones.
what about those makes them higher quality?
Well, the consistency for case volume, which is more important, has nothing to do with annealing, but has more important for reloading and consistency. The
brass hardness,
different types
too.
of the brass hardness, the brass type they're using. Typically, primer pockets
Just
will
the
last
cups.
longer.
Like the cups they start with are much higher quality, right? Like you're paying more for it. They start with better raw materials. I mean, all of these things make a premium piece of brass.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, we were kind of talking about use that higher quality brass just because, like, if you're going to get into this, go through the work and the process of annealing and kind of get to this level of reloading, you might as well have good brass to kind of make the juice worth the squeeze a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
And then also, if it's cheap brass, then why go through the trouble?
Yeah, you can easily replace it, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's easy to sit here and say that, but if somebody has a 243 Ackley and they're using Winchester brass, they've taken the time to fire form that stuff, you know.
That's fair.
So
That's true.
These are things that I don't think about because I would never do that.
so you have to be careful. I would definitely recommend if you're just getting into annealing or want to anneal, get some Templac so you can really understand. So Templac is a heat. It's a heat paint indicator.
I've never used it. This is new to me.
Wow, do tell. It's a paint you put on and it indicates how hot something is,
Yes.
or what?
So you put a mark of it, a dab. It comes in different forms, but use a little bottle with a brush or I think it's in pen form now too, like marker form. And you just mark the spot on the case that you want to get to a certain temperature, and then it changes color when it gets to that temperature.
Oh, okay.
So the paint comes
wow.
in different gradient. I mean, I
like
think in
the,
10 degree
like the mountains on the
gradients or
Coors can.
something. Kinda, yes.
I wonder if they use the same technology.
Probably not.
No, it's not the same. But okay, but that's good because I could see where I was watching a couple videos online, and I guess one thing there's it doesn't appear to be something you need to do for a long time as far as applying that heat.
Correct.
And I saw a couple individuals doing it very differently. One was very regimented, like the exact amount of time. It was done with like and I want to get into like the different ways you guys do it.
Right.
But like he basically had like kind of like a mechanized approach, and the other guy would just hold a case, go,
That gets really hot.
and then put it in.
So there's
there's like one guy was like hitting the exact same spot every time for a certain amount of time, and the other guy was like, I'm sure he was like doing it for like a head count or something like that, or maybe he was watching a clock. But it was there wasn't a scientific approach to it, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's basically, two main types of annealers. You have like induction annealers, which is some super secret science way of heating things, which is beyond me, but it's what it's called, an induction annealer. And then there's open flame, right? Those are the two different kinds. On either kind, they do have some sort of mechanical feeding mechanism. Like on mine, there's a dial, a time setting where you can control how long it spins around and then spits it out. And these induction annealers, you actually set the heat you want, and then it'll just spit it out, when it's done, or it'll
so
shut
it's
off
like
automatically.
It's like sous vide for your
right,
brass.
yeah, similar, right?
Well,
So,
it's hooked up to switches, though.
yeah, there is buttons.
Yeah, it's activated.
Okay.
So I have a Girard annealer that I bought before the induction method was around. Well, before it was
utilized in annealing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, before I knew it was. Anyways, so I have a Girard annealer, and then they made a kit to where you could add an induction annealer to it. So the Girard's big hopper, all the cases sit up there and just ride down, and the case drops down and goes into the induction annealer. The arm on the Girard is what activates the induction annealer to anneal, and then the timer. There's a time you set the timer on the induction annealer, and then the Girard spits it out when it's done. It just drops it.
Yeah,
So not fully sous vide.
No.
Close.
No.
So on the very high end of that, there's a fairly newcomer in the marketplace, at least new to me. It's called Amp Annealer. 4 or 5 years. Amp Annealer, Annealing Made Perfect is kind of the acronym. So basically, you use a sacrificial piece of brass and push a button, and it'll destroy that piece of brass. But in turn, it will decide how that brass is made and how long to heat it. So basically, you throw a piece out, and then the rest you put in, push the button, it'll do it computerized, pull it out, and it's perfect every single time. The downside of that is it's very slow. They have since, I believe, made a robot that will grab a piece of brass, stick it in there, pull it out, and it's a fairly inexpensive addition, $300-400 for the robot. I think the annealer is about $1,400 though. So it's a very pricey piece of equipment.
Dang.
But it does
it's pretty crazy when the robot is the cheap part.
yeah, that's right.
For crying out loud.
Yeah.
We must be in almost 2022. Friggin' robots are the cheap thing.
Correct. It's not like R2D2 full robot. It's like a little arm, right? Comes down, pulls it, drops it, whatever.
Sounds cool
But
to
yes,
me.
it is very cool. It is very cool.
Disposable robot.
Correct.
Okay, I've got a question. I've got a
buy
question.
cheap
with
off
that.
some Jawas.
So, from what I saw in the videos that I watched, the YouTubes, and this would have been, I guess this was like open flame annealing. But, the one guy was kind of rotating it, and the other guy was really just kind of hitting it in one spot, and that seemed like it was like, like kind of like in the same spot, and I'm like, well, how is that getting any even?
It's not.
It wasn't.
Not.
So
yeah,
you
that's
do
not.
want to
was
have
it a
like
two flame or a single? Sometimes there's two flame where they don't move as much, but I think even then you still want to rotate.
Well,
it.
don't quote me. But anyway, that's what appeared to be happening,
Right.
and I was like, well, I mean, it seems like it'd be hotter on the one spot. So maybe it was a two flame, and I'm an insane person.
I mean, the big thing to annealing, forgive me if I said this already, but is consistency.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Like if you're not getting your cases consistently annealed, you're doing what I warned of in the beginning. You're going to cause yourself more headache than help.
Yeah.
You'd been better off not annealing.
Well, I can imagine if it's malleable on one side and stiff and work hardened on the other side, that's going to get weird.
Yeah.
You have no idea which.
Or if you get the neck annealed but the shoulder not fully annealed, so it's just
takes a little practice.
It takes practice, and you'll notice this when if you don't get a shoulder annealed, and if you go through and measure every case before and after you size it, you'll see some just sprung back that didn't actually get sized because the annealed cases are sizing no problem, but the shoulder that didn't get annealed didn't size at all.
Yeah, it'll get sized and then spring back into the position it previously was before going through the die. Right.
So here's a question though, because at some point the people who are advanced reloaders who are getting into the annealing stuff, at some point they were not advanced reloaders who hadn't annealed yet.
Yep. Right.
So I'm guessing there has to be kind of this element of like a trial and error period of time or something where you got to practice, like you said, Tucker, which is also a little bit terrifying when we're talking about reloading ammunition that could explode in our face. But like, how does one kind of go through the process? Is it more just like frustration where it's like, I'm going to size this, it sprung back, shoot, now I have to go through the whole annealing thing all over again? Is it more just kind of dealing with an annoyance or?
Well, I think, like personally, I would say unless you're going to spend the money for like the what's the name? Amp annealer. The amp anneal.
Yeah, right.
The amp annealer, which is computer controlled programming and all types of
very
stuff.
user friendly, very easy.
Yeah.
Okay.
that would be the only way I would recommend annealing to somebody who's not very analytical about reloading. Because to your point, like, you have to be the type of person that enjoys it, but also wants to fully understand everything he's doing in the process.
Yeah.
And why every little thing is happening. And why, when I measured this one, this changed and this one didn't, or why are these bullets, some of them are seating farther in than others, all these little things. You have to be the type of person that wants to figure that out and enjoys it. In my opinion.
There's some people who are like, okay, I'll reload because I have to, but I don't really care about reloading that much. You know what I mean? I don't really just give me the way that plugs and plays and makes me have the ammo I want. Those people are probably not the ones who are going to want to do some of these more complex ways of annealing. Like, if anything's going to work for them, it's like, I need a robot to do it for me.
And to your point, though, like, learning it, they weren't, you're not starting out a great annealer, right? Unless you have this, boutique item. But, I mean, all of reloading is like that, right? You don't start out a master. Like, you got to start somewhere, trial and error practice. You'll find, by the time you get to a stage where you're starting to really think about annealing, you have generally come up, the people that are serious about it have usually kind of ironed out these things and kind of learned a little bit to where if you start and you have a bad one, you'll pick it out and kind of weed that stuff out. Generally, I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule, but I think that's kind of the motto for
you can't,
the progression.
I guess the important thing, too, I was just thinking of is you're not going to, unless you anneal the case head somehow, you're not going to cause any potential damage per se. You're not going to hurt yourself by annealing.
Like, you're not going to have a catastrophic failure.
Exactly.
Like, and that's one thing I was going to ask. Like, you talked about
that's not a guarantee from Vortex that you will.
Yeah, that's true.
You can totally destroy that cage by overheating it.
But
you can see
he's
that.
going to go, you said what?
Real quick, try and lawyer-proof us here. None of what we say should be taken.
This is not legal advice.
Disclaimer.
Exactly.
True story. I was going to ask, though, you're talking about, a person that maybe you're getting into it and you're trying to figure it out, and you're like, oh, man, this worked out perfectly, and maybe this one didn't. If you didn't catch, let's say you didn't catch that one wasn't, perfectly done, is it still going to feed and go off? You're just not going to get the consistency in your accuracy, or is there going to be something where you get a malfunction? Or?
I'd say you got
all of the above.
All the above. Yeah, it could. Any one of those things could happen. Yeah, it could. You may end up where you just can't chamber it because it was you were shooting in the rain the last time you shot, and that load just happened to expand. That case expanded, and you didn't get it resized. You didn't anneal it enough, so now it won't resize, and now you can't chamber it because it won't fit back in your chamber.
Okay. Is that something you would want to be careful of a little bit? Like, let's say you're maybe less experienced with this, you'd want to, gently, get that cartridge in? Or if you're slam it home, and you're like, oh, that didn't fit. Is that going to be bad for the rifle at all?
Generally, anytime you got to slam anything, it's probably time to stop. I've seen a rifle fully explode in Altus at a match. A guy, very experienced guy, was jamming on the bolt, and then finally got it shut. And that rifle shot probably 30 feet up in the air.
My gosh.
I think what happened, luckily he kept his face and his eyeballs.
Did he have a bullet stuck in there from a round before?
He racked one out, put one in. I think there was a bullet in there, and then when he jammed it, that bullet seated the new bullet down deep in that thing. When he got it shut,
and that, my
was
friend,
I was 20 feet away from this thing. It was scary.
Jesus.
So these are the dangers of reloading. This is why we have to be careful, meticulous, all of these things, right? So anytime, I'm jamming on a bolt, because I've seen that, I take the time to stop, figure out the issue, and then continue if I can, or not, figure it out in between stages or something like that.
And that, my friends, is why you don't run a load that you have the overall length jamming the bullets into the lands in a competition.
Yeah.
That would make sense. So, and I guess so that was all great information.
Yes.
I guess where I was coming from was maybe you're in a just hunting situation, and you fired a shot, and then it's time is of the essence, and you're just really where if you're talking about I guess I picture if I was doing this, Jim, I generally am conservative when it comes to these things.
Very much.
I would take that and I'd be like, okay, does it fit? Very slowly, watching as it goes in, And then I guess if you saw like some resistance, you'd be like, okay, that one wasn't a good one.
Yeah, so your rifle though, right? Or any type of bolt action. Like you know when it doesn't feel right.
Oh yeah, for
like,
sure.
You can tell that even at the early levels of marksmanship, right? So I mean, if you feel something that's weird, more than likely just err on the side of caution.
Plus the other thing, how many times have I have seen personally rifles go weird because you're being too ginger with it. You know what I mean? Like I feel like in a lot of ways, and Tucker even alluded to this before too, like annealing isn't necessarily the thing that somebody's going to go out there and say, oh, you're just starting reloading? Well, let's first get you an annealer.
Right.
It's like, no, you should reload for a while. You start to understand some things, understand how things work, why things work. Okay, now maybe we'll add an annealer. And so you kind of have this understanding. But I feel like if you go in and you're like real cautious about stuff, that's just when I've seen a lot of problems occur because you need to almost just run it like normal. Yeah. And then, like you're saying, your gun, you can okay, I ran it like normal. Ooh, wait a minute.
Yeah, you'll feel it.
Yeah.
If something's an issue. I mean, sometimes if you go really slow, you may cause like a failure to feed. I mean, that doesn't generally happen, but it does, right? Like that's a casualty of that action. So, yeah, I think if you feel something that's out of the norm, like stop. But I think other than that, like annealing is generally pretty safe as far as that goes, unless you're just torching the brass, which you can see that as soon as it happens. So there's no surprise.
Once the brass starts dripping out of the table.
Yeah, exactly. You have gone too far.
Stop.
You've over-annealed. Yeah. Well, and that was actually, can you overdo it? That was a question.
Absolutely.
I had. So obviously that's a yes. Okay.
Yep. So that's how the amp annealer analyzes that piece of brass. It overcooks it. I mean, it's destroyed. You can see it. You'll notice it is cooked. You will not put that into a gun ever. So you can totally overdo it, easily spotted. And
if there's any melted brass, I don't even know if it melts. It's
no,
almost
it just
like it
chars.
turns into a gas.
Yeah, it chars.
You'll get
and
missing
turns black.
sections off the neck, but you didn't see anything fall.
Right.
I mean, if you really want to char one, just go do it. And you can see, if,
Yeah.
Interesting. Well,
take experiments.
Sacrificial
with that amp
piece of brass.
You want to have a known, I guess, level of consistency among the other pieces of brass that you're going to do with it.
Right.
Because it wouldn't.
So, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, but I think you know where I'm headed.
Yeah,
there, so.
exactly. So how that works is there's a code that you then have for that particular brand lot of brass that if you were to go, 4 firings, 3 firings, you can go back, punch that number in, and then you'll be right back where you left off. So it'll be the same. I mean, that thing is fantastic for that.
And you just want to make sure that you're, I guess, keeping all that brass together, so you know that
in general, right?
Brass,
that's a good practice, right? No matter what it is. I mean, it's general to keep lots and manufacture stuff together.
You don't want to, you don't want to be going to a competition or on a hunt, and you're like, I got some rounds here. I mean, this brass, 5 firings on it. This is new stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to be doing that?
Correct.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah,
Consistency.
it's good practice.
Consistency is just so important across the board when it comes to shooting.
Yep.
I mean, it's everything. It's the equipment. It's your form, you, the shooter, mindset. It's everything. Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
What does okay, we've gotten a little bit into like Scott, you mentioned how your setup works. Tucker, you mentioned how your setup works. I mean, is it like setting up the equipment for it? What did it come in a kit? Did you just like go to Midway or who knows, reloadingcomponents.com and just like, oh yeah, it's an annealing kit, add to cart. Okay, I'm good. I mean, is that how it works? Or
So
is
mine-
it like other reloading things where you're like, no, add that to cart, add that to cart, add that to cart, go to another website, add that to cart?
So Scott's setup is option B.
Okay.
Mine comes in a nice, pretty little box. I think the guy's out of Florida. Anneal Ease is the name of it. It's $275. It's cheap. You bring it out. All you have to do is add a propane bottle, and I also recommend a regulator because it doesn't come with that. Just kind of keep that flame consistent because you don't want it, starting out strong, and then as the bottle gets empty, it'll weaken.
Yeah.
Have all these issues we spoke of. But that's a very easy system to buy. An amp annealer comes ready to go. It's like a CPU and a computer. You just put it on your desk, plug it in, and kind of go through the setup. But he's kind of put some pieces together, I believe, to get where he's at.
So the Gerard anneal I started out with, that is, you can go on Gerard's website and buy that annealer system. Same thing though, you need and maybe now he does include a regulator. I don't know, but you definitely want a regulator because, like Jimmy, you probably know with all the cooking you do with gas. I don't know how many gas grills you use these days.
Well, charcoal, Scott. my regulator is a little thing that just tells I can determine how much air is getting in.
But not only as a propane tank gets lower, as it gets colder, it changes the output.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
So,
sure.
So like say, I loaded up 300 pieces of brass and just walked away. Well, the last 150 probably aren't even annealed
Correct.
because the flame got lower because the propane's just not coming out as efficiently because it's now starting to freeze on the outside.
Okay.
Are there any methods that use like electricity versus open flame?
So that's the induction.
That's the
So
induction.
so that's what I added.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this company, Annie, I don't even know. Are they still
I haven't
around?
seen them in a while. I'm not saying they are or they're not.
Yeah,
Honestly, I don't know,
know.
but I know they were making really good annealers for quite some time.
Well, and they're not even really in the reloading business. They have like big
Electronic
induction
stuff,
annealers, yeah. So I'm sure they're still around. Whether or not they're toying in the reloading industry still, I have no idea. But it works fantastic. So you essentially have 2 coils and
Some kind of metal thing that goes around in
what do
circles.
they call it?
Like an alternator?
No, it's not quite to that extent.
Ferrites.
Okay.
So you have 2 ferrites, and then the brass just goes in between those, and the induction process magic happens.
We have to get
It
an
occurs.
engineer in here to explain that.
This is the part where there's a really detailed instructional tutorial leading up to the point, and then all of a sudden it just says, induction annealing occurs, and then you go back to, okay, well now we're going to go,
It's kind of like when you're explaining the birds and the bees.
Yeah, same.
Right,
and,
right. Something happens, and then we have more,
Then we got a little baby sister. Okay, cool. And then did you add that because you thought that would be more consistent?
Yes. So I added it for consistency and speed.
And speed. Okay.
Yeah, because with the flame, it's like 7-8 seconds a piece of brass on my annealer with Lapua brass. With the induction annealer, it's less than 3 seconds a pop.
that adds up.
And
With that Gerard that feeds it for you and all that, it all hooks up. That's fantastic.
More time back to your life to do other things.
And if I was using a different type of brass that had like thinner necks or something that annealed easier, it's like less than 2
quicker.
seconds.
Yeah, you notice that. So that's one thing also when you're annealing. I don't know if we touched on this, but time-wise, the thicker, usually more premium pieces will take, a second, 2 seconds, 4 seconds longer than it would if it was a thinner piece. So that's one way you kind of can judge your brass thickness also.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I can't stress this enough though, because I see, I've even seen like a lot of videos online where guys are and maybe they're doing this on purpose. I don't know. It doesn't fit what I do. Where they're just annealing the neck and not annealing the shoulder. And for me, because I want the same size case every time.
Yeah.
So I want to be annealing that shoulder so the case sizes.
Yeah,
and also fits in the chamber.
When it's proper, you should see a discoloration down about an 1/8 inch past the shoulder is usually what I assume that's correct. Yeah,
and
1/8 to a quarter.
Anything less than a 1/2 inch is probably safe.
Right.
And that's what you see, and I mean that's what you see when you get a cartridge that's factory loaded, and that's the indication that they've annealed it at the factory. That's that discoloration you see. I mean, we got a couple going on back there. We don't have to grab them, but yeah. So you must have to, if you're doing the open flame method, you must have to tweak where you're angling the flame.
100%.
Like you got to stick that flame right kind of into the notch where the neck meets the shoulder, or you got to have it more skewed towards one or the other.
That's a good question. So on this,
depends on the brass type.
Yeah, well that's true. So
Yeah.
on this particular one, there's a couple different little brackets on there, and you can adjust that nozzle wherever you want. So anytime you want to change calibers, it's a real problem. So I shot 6BR for a while, which is a very, very small case. I had to change the wheels on it. It has different size rollers for the brass. And then, you just put that torch kind of where you want it. But yes, it's kind of almost right at that junction, roughly. I mean, that's just not like a science. I just, where it's done, pull the brass, check it. Okay, that looks good. I mean, I'm not really like aiming it at a certain spot.
Yeah, I can't think of a situation where I have in the past where I've had the flame like directly on the neck. It's usually on the shoulder-ish.
And it's back a little bit too, right? So you're kind of in that blue part after the orange. You know what I mean? Like it's not right up on it all the time. And other people may do it that way. That may be fine. But just I kind of back it up away a little bit so it just kind of gets the heat from it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but like I said, the name of the game is consistency, right? Like if you're not doing it consistently, then you're kind of beating a dead horse here, but you're
kind of defeating the purpose,
Defeating
right?
the purpose.
Like that regulator with any torch annealer is mandatory,
Yes.
in my opinion. Whether the bottle gets empty or it gets cold, I mean, it will change the pressure. And then induction is kind of a plug and play method as long as you have it all set up.
Yeah.
You know? So
I feel like, okay, I don't think we've directly answered this question yet. There's a very specific time probably that you want the case to be in the heating element.
right.
And then you're done at some point, and so you take the brass out. How does one determine what is just the right amount of time? Have we talked about that yet? So like
I think
you have to kind of like the first time you do it with a new set of brass, or the first time you're going to anneal, if you think back to the first time you guys did it, did you go like, okay, we'll go like 3 seconds, I'll check it, and then is there a characteristic that I'm looking for where I'm like, yeah, not yet, that needs another 2 seconds, check it, another 1 second. I mean, does that occur?
So usually within the same brand of brass, the only time you'll notice a difference in time is if you have one of these fancy annealers, right? Like I'm not going to be able to tell a difference from my Alpha 6 GT brass this time versus, my next lot. Like I look at it, get it close, and then I just familiar with what it should look like, and that's when I call it good.
Is it the discoloration that
Yep,
you're seeing?
the discoloration.
You're like, okay.
Yep.
You're like, if it's still really yellow and it's not turning that like bluish, whitish, purplish color.
The discoloration, then also
That's
the consistency when sizing afterwards.
Oh,
right.
so you kind of you can't necessarily do it right there. You can look at it and kind of get an idea, probably if you have more of a keen eye, but it's going to show up further on down the line in your
you'll
process.
actually, if you're an experienced reloader, which if you're annealing, you should be, like we've already said, you're going to feel it in how that case size, most likely, as long as you're consistent with your lube anyways.
Yep.
You're going to feel when you bump that shoulder back, you will feel that if it's not annealed, your press will cam over just slightly harder.
You'll feel it.
Okay.
And it's just like a rifle bolt, right? Like when you're used to feeling one thing on the press and then you feel something different, like once you're really used to pumping that handle, like you can feel it when it does cam over a little bit.
And then the good thing is when you do feel something odd when you're reloading anyways, is you can take it out and measure it and see if it is different than the other ones. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was something that was interesting, and maybe this is kind of a parallel, but when Ryan and I were sizing those muzzleloader bullets the other day, like on the first round through, you're like, resistance, and then on the other ones, it's like, oh nope, those are pretty much all the same,
right?
And so I guess
you
like
can feel the
just talk
difference, right?
about feeling that difference,
Yeah, so same thing. It's just like when you're seating bullets on, 300-400 in a row, like you're going to feel ones that kind of get stuck. So maybe your trim wasn't right, or maybe a neck was bent over. I mean, there's a million things it could be, but your hand will feel the difference.
Is there anything? What about cooling after heating it? Are you just air cooling it? Or is there a water component? What's going on there?
No, just
air cool. I mean, you can drop them in water. I don't think it changes.
I think
anything.
you quench it at that point and make it very hard, like a knife. I've never tried it, so I don't know.
think. I don't think
that's what I thought.
I don't know.
Yeah, I've always
don't
just
know
air
the answer
cooled
to
it.
that, but I air
20
cool.
minutes, it's done. I'm ready to throw it in the press and
Yeah.
Okay.
There's any blacksmiths or metallurgists out there? I'd be curious because I
Somebody
always
leave
thought.
a read on
I always
that,
thought. I mean, you see like in the old blacksmith,
Yeah.
movies or whatever, which of course is like a terrible place to get your information. But they're like, what? Get super hot, do something there, and then you.
Yeah, well, that's how
always,
you
like,
harden
super
steel,
cool,
right?
That's right. Yeah.
So you get it hot in the forge or stove or whatever you're using, and then a dunk in oil or water, depending on the steel, will then harden it. So I don't know if brass has the same characteristic as steel.
Yeah.
I mean, it is metal. I would think it's similar, but I don't know.
I don't know.
Yep, same.
We don't know.
If you've taken anything away from this, hopefully it wasn't that.
Yeah, we could have just started at the beginning. I tell you what, you want to know about annealing, just watch an old blacksmith movie.
It's exactly like that. We're going to just heat it up real hot, beat on it, and dunk it in oil.
Have we missed anything on annealing?
I can't think of any. I mean, it seems like conceptually a rather simple thing.
Yeah.
You're adding heat to fired brass to make it more malleable again or whatever, unwork harden it. That's not a term. But it takes a lot of like finesse and experience and kind of that, just.
It's really no different than anything else with reloading. right?
That's fair. A
kinda
lot
what
of
I was
things with
getting at.
reloading
Yeah.
take a lot of
If you want
reps
precision,
and
both of us are coming from a precision background, right? So that's why we do the things we do. You know, if you are just plinking at the range,
oh, right.
Thank you, Scott, for respecting my feelings.
you know, if you're the type of guy that's picking up range brass and reloading that, like, don't even mess with
Different ball
annealing.
game.
That's
Okay.
you know.
Okay.
Shoot it, throw it, whatever.
By the way, I would not recommend picking up range brass and reloading it just to clear the air.
Not your game, huh?
Well, you just
What
don't,
if-
you don't know
what it's been through.
what that piece of brass has been.
What if you were
Could have led a very bad life.
Denzel Washington in the Book of Eli? Would you pick up range brass and reload it?
Well, yeah, but he was a different guy. I mean, that's on another level.
Yeah, I'm just saying, you know,
He's
I
pretty-
wouldn't say, you know, never say never, Scott. That's what I'm getting at.
I got another question. So we've talked about. That's a good movie, by the way.
Great
That
movie.
is a great movie.
Fantastic
Yeah.
movie.
Gosh.
Ryan Mucken and I somehow catch that movie about every time we are on a road trip. and
You've
we
never.
end up
I don't
in
think
the
you guys have ever seen it though. Like beginning.
Not
to
in
end.
its entirety,
Yeah.
no. That and Castaway. Those are the two that we always seem to catch for some reason. Okay. Because you don't have to anneal to reload, right? I mean, we've
Correct.
established that, but I guess I just want to circle back to, like, okay, so you're a reloader. So when is it required to anneal and when is it not?
That's a good question.
Preference.
Yeah, preference is a big part of that. And then for me, like the reason I switched to kind of one every time is just brass longevity and consistency across every reloading cycle, right? Does it make a big difference or a difference at all? I don't know. That's what I was saying, like kind of in the beginning, there's not really a right or wrong answer, right? It's kind of preference, like Scott was saying. If you want precision out of your gun, more than likely you're eventually going to be annealing your brass, so you're not replacing it more often.
Okay.
So you're not having these cracks, these abnormal. Okay, well this shoulder is too thou out of spec. You know what I mean? You're going to avoid a lot of these little inconsistencies that would in turn cost you points in a precision rifle game. You know?
Okay.
The more precise that you want to get, it seems the less amount of things you can just sort of leave alone.
Yeah.
Like you start wanting to have your hand in everything, you know? Like I mean, to the point where some people are probably so obsessed with precision and consistency, they're like, you know what? I want to melt the brass and make my case, or you know, whatever it is.
Right,
like I want to be
yeah.
the like you want to try and do everything that you can.
There are guys that make their own bullets.
Yeah.
Guys, make their way. Has anybody homemade their own
I have not.
brass case?
Brass,
that
that
would
I
be
don't.
something
No,
else.
I think you have to have
Well,
because they start with a cup.
If they're
right?
late, well, unless it's lathe turn.
Oh, well, that's different. Yeah.
Oh, that would be really
And that's kind of like the way the 6.5 BC is.
Yeah.
The old 6.5 BC had some lathe turn brass. That's
Yeah.
right.
And
Side note, not dead. 6.5 BC.
It's,
we
we got
just-
some stuff the other day.
We got some stuff. We were just unfortunate victims, like the rest of the world, of a shortage of supply of some components. But we got some stuff.
It's possible we need to do an inventory of what we have, but we may have what we need to get that up and running again. Possibly do some annealing. I don't know.
Round developed for just hunting.
Yes.
Unapologetically designed for just hunting.
Have you seen that brass?
I'm only on video.
You
No.
can,
I didn't realize it was lathe turned brass.
you can. At least the first batch they got, you could literally take the case and like stand on the freaking neck.
Oh,
and you
I'm
couldn't
sure
get
it was
to
hard.
bend.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you could. Yeah, that case.
It was stout.
That case fought back.
Did Ryan like break a press trying to size one? He broke something, I thought.
We did break something,
Yeah, I remember something
but
broke.
it may have been less Ryan and more me. But then Ryan came along, and he was just the final like straw that broke the camel's back. Whereas
Scapegoat.
Easy, right?
Well, and
right. It was
also
like, hey,
the-
Ryan, I don't know about this thing. Can you go check it? Oh, it's broken. Wow, Ryan.
Well, the size, I believe also the sizing reamer was way undersized for the first sizing die that you guys had made.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that
I
sounds
remember
about
measuring
right.
it and
I mean, all
thinking,
thi-
that's not
It
good.
doesn't
Yeah,
help that
stuff
Jim
was
is-
goofed.
It doesn't help
but-
that Jim is full send, and like Ryan will like show him once. He's like, "Yeah, I got it. I'm like, "Jim, do you know how to do that?" No, and like he's just still pulling the levers and like putting things in, and then like all of a sudden it's broken. It's like, oh,
Doesn't matter.
surprise.
But yeah, I mean, all things to expect when you're making a Wildcat. You know, just it's never gonna work right out of the gate. But
Yeah, and-
as perfect as you hoped.
And I was just saying, to touch on kind of the brass longevity and precision stuff too, a big part of kind of making this a cohesive unit is to like have a good sizing die with like a bushing that will control the neck tension, so you don't have to overwork the brass all the time. So those two things to me kind of go hand in hand. I just figured it was kind of worth a mention.
Yeah, yeah. You don't want to.
If you're like a just all-star annealer and everything else in your reloading setup is like not that great.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, got it.
You kind of want to make all that stuff work together.
Yeah.
So
that kind of goes toward what I talked about earlier. You know, there are certain. I can tell you when it comes to dies, you typically get what you pay for, right?
Okay.
And so typically the cheaper dies will overwork your case neck.
Oh.
To the tune of sometimes 8, 9, 10,000s.
Yeah, crazy.
Where really you want like 2,000.
Okay.
You know, so now another area I differ from Tucker is I don't like bushing dies. I want the whole case size by one die. I don't want a floating bushing. So I actually get, I go that route. Usually I just buy Forester dies.
Gotcha.
And most of the time they're already providing 2,000 neck tension for the specific case that I'm loading. And if they're not, Forester offers a custom honing service where you just send them a case of what you want that to be sizing, and it's like $15 or $20 or something.
That's not bad.
So you just get so you essentially have a custom die at that
for
point.
the brass you're using, right?
For the brass, yeah. But like if you get, 647, 6547, 6-dasher, like Forester already assumes you're using Lapua
brass, right?
So it's 2,000 neck tension.
Same neck tension.
So you don't have to get it custom.
Right.
Cool.
So
good to know.
There's a lot of thous going around. I like just understood annealing, and I'm like, I'm feeling pretty good. And then I was like, oh yeah, that's right.
So
there's a lot of
there's
still
one more thing I want to say, just because I'm
do.
sure there's somebody MFing me out there right now about
just like physically beating their car stereo.
There's somebody going, what about F-class? What about bench rest?
Oh, those guys who reload on the bench?
Yes, all that stuff. So I think those guys are doing something specific to where they can literally possibly see the difference in annealing and not annealing. And I would not disagree with them if they told me I anneal every time because I see a difference that helps me.
Yeah, they're shooting tiny groups at 1,000 yards, 600 yards.
And I'm not going to tell them any different.
Right.
For what I do, I don't see the difference. So to me, it's just
because you're just precision shooting.
Yeah, you're just PRSing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Don't mind him, Mark. He's just PRSing.
He's just PRSing again.
I don't think you guys are the first people to use
that acronym in that way.
Yeah. Shouldn't be laughing about that.
No,
we fully support the PRS.
We do.
We
okay, but that's it's all good info. No, I think this has been enlightening. I'm glad. Hopefully, Zach H. We kind of have addressed this to your liking. If there's anything else out there, though, definitely let us know, and maybe we can do a follow up or something like that. But I'd love to hear. I think one of the cool things about annealing, one of the interesting things, I mean, like guys like Scott who's getting 40 reloads or something out of brass, and Tucker, you're getting a lot out of your brass. I mean, how many reloads are people out there who are listening who do this kind of stuff, getting out of their brass? I don't know. I'm just curious. Shout it out in the comments. Anything else, Mark?
No, man. Just like you said. I mean, do you anneal? Have you been annealing? Do you have more questions about annealing?
Is your name Neil?
Comment below. Let us know, and we'll try and address them.
Cool.
And then, is there going to be a spot on the whatever page? Maybe we can get some pics of different annealers that these guys can see.
It's possible they can post and tag us on Instagram, Vortex Nation Podcast. We can look at that.
All right.
Do it.
Awesome.
Easy. Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
it was fun.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you. That was fun. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
See you
later.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.